Relax yourself, girl, please stop playing. Relax yourself, girl, please settle down. Relax yourself, girl, please settle down. Relax yourself, girl, please settle down. What's up, everybody? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Finally, shout out to the University of Pittsburgh for doing big things and for bringing me in. I'm so sorry I don't have the three-piece suit, the pointy shoes, and things of that nature. But if you know me, you know I'm hip hop, and I'm bringing it straight through with the Keith Haring, support the artists and things of that nature. Super duper fresh. Got the Jordans in the building, of course. But yeah, thank you for having me. I know you wanted me in a Zoom box, but I wanted something different. You know why? Because the students and the individuals at University of Pittsburgh deserve different. Y'all deserve things that aren't normal, and y'all deserve the best. So that's why we're here. First of all, I would like to thank my DJ, TJ in the building. I also would like to thank the University of Pittsburgh for allowing me to express myself and to really focus in on what we all should be talking about right now in never being a spectator. My name's Ime Alaquiva. I am a cinematic poet. I am someone of, caliber to sort of be an artist. I like to call myself that. And most importantly, I'm a human being. And a human being that understands his strengths and understands what it's like to be able to have individuals surrounding you that are full of allyship and that are full of advocacy as well. We're here today. Never a spectator. I'm definitely not a spectator. However, today and in this talk, in this chat, this one-on-one, us building together, we're going to learn together how to go from a spectator to us being spectacular. Before we do that, let's moonwalk and let's throw it back a little bit. Yeah, this makes me feel real good. Brings me back to a super duper cool time. With some adversities, but let's get to it. So, growing up in the Wilkinsburg section of Pittsburgh, single parent, Mom Dukes did the best she could with 2 jobs, me and my sister. Growing up, a lot of gangs, a lot of things going on in the Wilkinsburg area. What was I to do as a young man growing up? There wasn't a lot of things going on, but to get into trouble, but to get into mischievous things that I found myself getting into as a young man. But of course, growing up, sometimes life gets in the way of living, so there's some adversities that sort of came my way. But I found myself with hip hop.
For every word they trace is a scar they keep. Cause when I speak, they freak to sweat the technique. I made my debut in '86 with a melody and a president's mix. And now I stay on target and refuse to miss. And I still make hits for beats. Parties, clubs, and cars and jeeps. My underground sound vibrates the streets.
With hip hop, it spoke to me in a way nothing else spoke to me. And it was art. It was the art of music, the art of lyricism, the art of poetry that I would store in my back pocket as a way to possibly get into and sort of delve into to figure out how I can put pieces together for my own life. As I mentioned, life got in the way of living, certain adversities hit, things of that nature, but I always held on to the arts as a way to sort of escape some of the things that I was going through in my life. When life gets in the way of living, sometimes it renders yourself as homeless. So, right, I was homeless for a year and a half, walking the streets of Oakland, surprisingly, University of Pittsburgh, yes, Oakland. And I remember one individual, this man, who would sing his heart out in Oakland, and he was blind. And I had a chance to sort of witness people spectate him and treat him less than desirable. And his name was Bill Dorsey, an incredible singer. There was also another gentleman who would wear a sombrero hat. And he would have this phrase every time I would walk up and down the streets of Oakland. And he would say, does anybody have any change? And when I was homeless, sort of walking, and when I would hear him, I would always hear this, does anybody have any change? Now, a lot of you may think that he was asking for change as far as money, but as I grew, I started to think to myself, he could be asking, does anyone have any change? Not change, but change. And that's when I related it to Eric B. and Rakim paid in full on that whole marriage and that parallel.
This is a journey into sound. This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new value.
But now I learn to earn 'cause I'm righteous. I feel great, so maybe I might just search for a 9 to 5. If I strive, then maybe I'll stay alive. So I walk up the street, whistling this, feeling out of place, 'cause man do I miss a pen and a paper, a stereo, a taper. Me and Eric being a nice big plate of fish, which is my favorite dish. But without no money, it's still a wish. 'Cause I don't like to dream about getting paid, so I dig into the books of the rhymes that I made. So now it's a test to see if
Paid in Full was an incredible album for me. And that was an incredible song for me because it talked about being paid in full. And I sort of incorporated into what the gentleman was saying, does anybody have any change? And I sort of put those two and two together. And as I wanted to get out of homelessness, those were some of my inspirations because I would spectate this gentleman with the sombrero hat that would stand in front of McDonald's, on Forbes, and he helped to change my life as well. So where does that lead us? That allowed me to understand what my possibility was. And the fact that I was in my early 20s and homeless, I said, you know what? A lot of individuals spectated me, and they were spectators of my life. They watched me. How can I flip the script? And, I eventually called my mother. As I tell this story often, I called my mother and said, hey, Mom, I've been homeless. And she said, why did it take you so long? So I shifted the trajectory of my life at that moment. And I no longer wanted to be a spectator on what my life could be, but how I can become spectacular instead of a spectator. So that leads us to, focusing, getting into a home, getting my plans together, working it out, organizing, and getting really, really, really tunnel focused to whereas I opened up my own recording studio in 2001, opened my nonprofit arts education program in 2007, to leading up to 2020, or the 2000s, where I have an interactive photography exhibit called Optic Voices. And when we talk about what it means to be a spectator versus connecting with other individuals on being spectacular, in 2016, on a lunch break in between film shoots, I took a picture of a young man by the name of Dakari who was 2 years old. And when I took the photo of this young man, it sort of resonated with me like, wow, photography could be a certain thing, or curating an exhibit could be a certain thing, because here I was in the middle of my lunch break being a spectator to what was going on with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I said, you know what, I'm not going to be a spectator. I'm going to really engage in to my allyship and my advocacy as well. In 2020, it changed a lot of our lives. It changed my life. It changed my family's life. It changed just how we do things and how we treat each other, and what allyship and what advocacy really means. You know what I'm talking about. You know what happened at the end of May. You know what struck a chord in you when you saw a human being dissolve into the cosmos in 4K resolution. It hurt me. It hurt us all.
We are in a state of emergency.
And it's just a continuing injustice, and that's the frustration, and that's the protest.
Not too long ago, I gave my kids a kiss because I was coming downtown for what could be the last time I come and see them.
Do what you say. This country is supposed to be about the land of the free for all.
That's what we're doing today, and that's what we're about. And we're going to keep doing this until we have justice and freedom.
Everybody needs to stand up and fight for what's right.
I am not condemning anybody for being fed up, for being tired, and for not trusting in this system any longer.
So if you want us to do better, then damn it, you do better.
It is our duty to fight for our freedom.
I can breathe.
So when we cried out as a nation, when we took to the streets and said, change has to happen, we saw more allies and more advocacy at that time than any other time in American history. You know, the world for that matter.
From Brazil to Iran, thousands have gathered to show solidarity with U.S. protests over the killing of George Floyd. He died after a Minneapolis cop kneeled on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. The worldwide events echoed peaceful messages in support of the Black Lives Matter movement.
You know, George Floyd protests in London, UK, Africa, you name it. They were all about it. And this was no longer an American issue, because a lot of people were fed up with being a spectator. I knew we had to do something totally different than we've ever done before. I knew at that moment we had to fight the power.
Fight the power! Fight the power! Fight the power! Fight the power! Power!
I picked up my camera. I said, whatever I do, I am going to document this time, because documentation is so important. Paul Robeson said it best. Artists are the gatekeepers of the truth. And I was no longer, regardless of COVID or whatever the case is, I was going to get out into the streets and stop being a spectator. So with that, we began to film, do photography, protest after protest, make sure we were there for individuals in the community who were fighting for change. Then as I began to bring this photography and this videography back home, I began to show my family. And one night I had to share what happened to George Floyd to my 8-year-old daughter. And all she said was, wow. You know, of course she couldn't comprehend it, but she knew something was going on in America. From televisions, from conversations that she would have at school and other individuals in her neighborhood. She knew something was going on. So me as a father, I had an obligation to say, hey, listen, you know, here's photography. This is what happened with George Floyd.
The reason why we're marching all over the world is we were like George. We couldn't breathe.
So it's our time
that we all want to see for Black America.
And as I began to bring home images, she noticed that something was missing. She said, Dad, there's no one doing ASL or anyone deaf or those with a disability in any of your work. And a little backstory is that 2 years ago, my daughter and I did ASL as a language in order to bring our relationship together. And it proved to be transformative because it locked in. She retained the information. So when she said, Dad, there's no one doing sign language or no one deaf or disability, what are you doing? So at that moment is when I couldn't sleep that day, and I penned a PSA called Unspeakable. And Unspeakable was an incredible collaboration of individuals from different walks of life that came together in the name of allyship, in the name of advocacy, because during this fight and during this intersection of American history, we were spectators. And I use the deaf and hard of hearing and those with disability, I use that community because we were individuals that didn't necessarily know. So we were spectating. But it was when we came together as a unit to say, hey, listen, this is how we're going to go from being a spectator to together being spectacular. So Unspeakable, we filmed at 4 or 5 Black Lives Matter protests throughout the city of Pittsburgh, and we used individuals of the deaf and hard of hearing community, and it was amazing. When we released Unspeakable, it went viral all over the world. 60 countries, 300 million people watched our PSA. Michaela was featured at 8 years old on Good Morning America.
All right, and when we come back, the father and daughter noticing something missing at those protests against injustice and taking it upon themselves to do something about it. Stay with us. All right, so please welcome Ime and Michaela Alaquiva. Thank you guys so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute delight to be here. Thank you.
And so, Ime, we know you are separate from your daughter right now because you're down in Washington for the Get Your Knee Off Our Necks march. But Michaela, tell us, you played a large part in the idea for Unspeakable. How did you know that you wanted to create something like this with your dad?
I just wanted to make sure everyone was heard. And even if they don't have a voice, even if they can't hear, even if they can't hear, they need to be heard.
That is a very simple and important message, Michaela. You are incredible.
You can't tell me that we don't have what it takes to go from a spectator to spectacular. If we start to dig in to how we can be better as a unit versus being good as individuals and learn how to become spectacular even at a young age, then from there, a network in Japan asked to do a story on it. Next thing you know, when we dug a little bit deeper into the research, we found out that that television network in Japan broadcast to over 60 countries and over 300 million people. Just from one idea of us being spectators and coming together as individuals from all walks of life to becoming spectacular. So when we think about what we can do in order to go from the spectator and never being a spectator to being spectacular together, I came up with 5 steps to how we could graduate from being a spectator over to being spectacular. So that first step, going from a spectator to spectacular, is first we got to go within ourselves. We have to have knowledge of self. We have to gather what we know, but also what we don't know. And it's okay to not have the knowledge about a particular situation or a particular culture. Because when we go within, we have to do inventory. And I'll share one story. I used to work at a place called Athlete's Foot in Monroeville Mall. And I had a manager who would always send me to the back to do inventory. And I used to absolutely hate it. And we did this for about 3 months. Ime, do inventory. Ime, do inventory. Go in the back room. Boom, boom. Don't come out on the floor. And for 3 months, it would rack my brain on why he wanted me to do inventory and not necessarily go out and sell clothes and sell shoes. Till one day he said, Ime, all right, I think you're ready. You can come out on the floor. When I went out on the floor, I was able to, within 30 days, become the top salesman in the entire store because I knew inventory. I knew what was there. And sometimes, whether it's our closet at home, if it's relationships that we have, if it's with our spouses, we have to do inventory on our relationships because we have to find out what is there that we might have forgot what was there. And here's the research for that. You ever look for something or go somewhere and maybe behind the bed or something like that, or in the closet, and you're looking for something, but you find something else that you forgot was there? That's inventory. That's the definition of going within so that we could do our own inventory of ourselves to see what we got to work on before we move to that next step. Establish your attribute. Number 2, find out what we're good at. Find out what we could offer in something that we could add on. Not necessarily take away, but what can we add on to the conversation in order for other individuals to build off of that and to learn from that? One thing with the arts have always been in my back pocket. With the arts, it has allowed me to have a superpower to be able to engage in conversations that I might not necessarily even be a part of if it wasn't for my art. So that is my attribute to the world. Find your attribute. What are you good at? What can you put together that can add on to the conversation? That's number 2. Number 3, discover the possibility. You might not necessarily be the very best at what you do, but if you're consistent at what you do, regardless if people hate or love you, they'll respect what you have to offer. But we have to discover that possibility. And if we do not engage in action with that possibility, how will we ever know? There was a young lady at a protest on Pitt's campus, and her sign said, "I'm sorry, I'm late. I had a lot to learn." And in that photo, it says a lot about, hey, listen, I might not have had all the answers, but I'm here today to discover what's possible on how we can start that conversation. And a lot of these conversations with being a spectator is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be uncomfortable. And when things are uncomfortable, that is when we can really dig into the roots of what the problem is so we can establish a solution. That is what discovering the possibility is. Allyship, advocacy, Those two buzzwords in 2020 and in 2021, everybody's, oh, allyship. Oh, there's advocacy. We have to be an advocate. But that's real. That is utterly real. How can we add on, which is the root word of advocacy? Not replacing voices, but how do we add on those voices? And very much like we did with Unspeakable, we did our research. We didn't just show up to the party and just automatically start thinking that we could just put together a project surrounding the deaf, hard of hearing, and disability community. But we had to learn all the nuances and all the cultural nuances that were associated with the deaf, hard of hearing, and disability community. We never knew that there was a difference between ASL and BASL. We didn't know the term hearing impaired was an old term, almost like calling black people colored. We didn't know any of that if we didn't dig into the research. So that's what allyship is. Getting to know the culture, getting to know the nuances of the individuals that we need to learn about or that we need to support. That is what we did when it came to allyship and advocacy. So as you're watching this, understand that those are two incredible words that we need to marry with whatever it is that we do in step 4. Activate your actions. Number 5. You have to take a risk. What good is a risk if you don't take it? That is core belief that you have to take with you when you sort of understand what action is. Of course, every action has a reaction, but if you sit on the sidelines and you watch during this pivotal intersection of American history, you might lose out. You have to take action, whether that's volunteering, whether that's calling up individuals and saying, hey, listen, how can I help? I know I'm not necessarily the expert at this, but how can I help? You have to take action. That's what we did. We didn't know anything about the deaf community, but my daughter and I, and the individuals that worked on this piece, we all took action. We didn't have a budget whatsoever, but we do understand that there's a budget for everything that you do. The difference is the currency. And when you go out into the world, out into the space, as students, as grad students, as individuals who are a part of this collective with the University of Pittsburgh and beyond, recognize that you can never be a spectator. But if you are, come together and let us join forces to become spectacular. So when we do these Q&As, ask whatever it is that you want. We can talk about whatever, but remember, let us aim to becoming spectacular once again.
I love to see anything positive going on here, and I know that it came out of tragedy, but those are the moments where we rise up.
We are telling the truth. This could have been somewhere else, and I demanded that it be in Antoine's hood.
It's important for the community to come together on my brother's day because this is what he did. He gave back.
A place like Hawkins Village and Rankin that doesn't get a lot of support and services, it's a beautiful thing and a beautiful event, man. I'm just happy.
Spirit. So when you see the community growing, we know that we got a gift in heaven that continues to pour down on us. And that's what it's about.
We just doing it out of
Let us go from never a spectator to being spectacular together. Don't forget those 5 steps that we discussed. Together, if we go from being a spectator to being spectacular, we'll always still be number 1. Thanks for having me.
you know he's down with us. D Square, he's down with us. Keep what money.